Consumer Reports just dropped a list that has the entire used car market buzzing, because in a world of $40,000 new cars and sky-high repair bills, these are the machines that simply refuse to die. We're talking about real cars, real miles, and real listings still floating around the US market for under $4,000. These aren't garage queens or collector toys. These are daily drivers that have survived decades of abuse, neglect, bad owners, and rough roads, and they're somehow still going. When Consumer Reports talks about cars that refuse to die, they're talking about models backed by years of owner surveys, long-term reliability data, and real-world longevity stories that go far beyond marketing hype. At the very top of this list sits the Toyota Corolla from the late 1990s through the 2000s, the undisputed poster child of automotive immortality. This is the car that mechanics quietly respect and owners never seem to get rid of. Under the hood, there's nothing flashy. Simple engines, conservative tuning, and old-school engineering that prioritize durability over excitement. That simplicity is exactly why these Corollas regularly push past 200,000 miles with nothing more than oil changes, timing belts, and basic maintenance. Even today, you can still find clean examples from the mid-90s and early 2000s listed under $4,000, and parts are everywhere. Junkyards are full of them. Aftermarket support is endless, and nearly every mechanic in America knows how to fix one with their eyes closed. This is why the Corolla doesn't just survive, it outlives its owners. Right alongside it is the early 2000s Honda Civic, another legend that earned its reputation the hard way. These cars weren't built to impress. They were built to work, and that's exactly what they've done for decades. Civics from this era regularly sell between $2,000 and $4,000, and when you find a good one, it can still deliver incredible fuel economy, low insurance costs, and shockingly low repair bills. Consumer Reports data and owner feedback consistently highlight how well these engines and transmissions hold up over time. But the real secret is knowing what to look for. A well-maintained Civic can be a steal, while a neglected one can become a headache. So buyers who know the service history and avoid heavily modified examples tend to win big. That's why Civics continue to dominate budget car discussions online. They're cheap to buy, cheap to run, and stubbornly hard to kill. Then there's the Toyota Camry from the late 1990s and 2000s, the car that quietly became America's long-haul champion. If the Corolla is the survivor, the Camry is the marathon runner. These mid-size sedans were engineered to rack up highway miles without complaint. And stories of 250,000-mile Camrys are so common they barely raise eyebrows anymore. Consumer Reports consistently ranked these generations highly for reliability, and the used market reflects that legacy. Even today, older Camrys hover around the $3,000 to $4,000 range, offering more space, more comfort, and a smoother ride than most compacts. They're the kind of car that gets passed down through families, survives teenage drivers, and keeps running long after newer cars have given up. The Camry doesn't ask for much, just basic care. And in return, it keeps showing up every morning, year after year. The Subaru Impreza adds a different kind of toughness to this list because it brings all-wheel drive into the sub-$4,000 conversation. Older Imprezas from the late 1990s and early 2000s are harder to find, but they're still out there. And for buyers in snowy or rainy regions, they can be absolute gold. Consumer Reports data shows mixed reliability compared to Toyota and Honda, but the real-world appeal comes from traction and capability that most cheap cars simply can't offer. These cars handle bad weather like champs, making them especially valuable in northern states. That said, they do come with caveats. Head gasket issues and rust are known concerns. But for buyers who inspect carefully and budget wisely, an old Impreza can be a dependable, confidence-inspiring daily driver that punches far above its price tag. Often overlooked in these conversations is the early 2000s Nissan Sentra, a car that rarely gets praise but quietly does its job. Sentras from around 2000 to 2005 regularly show up under $4,000, and their biggest strength is simplicity. No complex electronics, no high-strung engines, just basic transportation that, when maintained, keeps going. Consumer Reports and owner experiences suggest these cars don't have the legendary status of a Corolla or Civic, but they also don't carry the same price premium. That makes them a smart option for buyers who want reliability without the hype. In many cases, Sentras are owned by older drivers, driven gently and serviced regularly. which means hidden gems are still sitting in classifieds waiting to be discovered. Rounding out the main list is the Hyundai Elantra from the early 2000s, a car that represents a turning point for the brand. This was the era when Hyundai started taking reliability seriously, and it shows. Elantras from 2000 to 2005 are frequently found under $4,000 and often surprise buyers with how well they've held up. Consumer Reports data from this period shows improving reliability scores, and many owners report trouble-free ownership well past 150,000 miles. These cars don't have the same cult following as Japanese rivals, which keeps prices low, but that's exactly why they're such strong value picks today. They offer solid build quality, reasonable comfort, and a level of durability that few expected when they were new. Beyond the official picks, there are also some real-world survivors that deserve honorable mentions. Cars like the Ford Crown Victoria and Lincoln Town Car weren't Consumer Reports darlings, but their simple V8 engines, body-on-frame construction, and fleet-tested durability make them nearly indestructible if maintained properly. Many of these cars spent years as taxis or police vehicles and still managed to cross the 200,000-mile mark with ease. Similarly, older Buick Regals and LeSabres with the legendary V6 engines often fly under the radar, offering comfort and durability for buyers on a strict budget. These cars prove that reliability doesn't always come from reputation alone. Sometimes it comes from old-school engineering and proven components. When shopping for any car under $4,000, Consumer Reports and experienced buyers agree that inspection is everything. At this price point, condition matters more than brand. Checking for rust, listening for engine noise, verifying maintenance records, and getting a pre-purchase inspection can mean the difference between finding a car that refuses to die and buying one that's already on its last breath. These cars still exist in the US market because they were built right from the start, and for buyers willing to look past shiny screens and modern gimmicks, they represent one of the last great bargains in the automotive world, because as prices rise and new cars become more complex, these old survivors keep proving that sometimes the toughest machines are the simplest ones, and the reason they refuse to die is because they were never designed to quit in the first place. And that brings us to the question every budget buyer needs to ask before handing over cash, which is how to tell the difference between a survivor and a money pit, when every listing claims the car runs great and just needs minor work. And that's where understanding buyer psychology at the bottom of the used car market becomes just as important as understanding the car itself, because under $4,000, sellers know demand is high and honesty is optional. This is why Consumer Reports emphasizes patterns over promises. Service history, ownership length, and model year trends matter far more than a shiny exterior or fresh oil change. A Corolla with faded paint but consistent maintenance is worth more than a spotless one with unknown history, and the same logic applies to every car on this list. These vehicles earned their reputation by surviving neglect, but that doesn't mean they're immune to abuse, and knowing where that line is can save buyers thousands. Another key reason these cars refuse to die is parts availability, which quietly determines whether an old car lives or gets scrapped. Corolla, Civic, and Camry parts are everywhere. Aftermarket, OEM, rebuilt, junkyard, and that keeps repair costs low, even as the cars age. When a starter fails or a sensor goes bad, you're not hunting for discontinued components or paying dealership prices. Subaru Imprezas, while slightly more complex, still benefit from a massive enthusiast base that keeps parts circulating. Even Sentras and Elantras from this era remain affordable to fix precisely because millions were sold, and that scale matters more than badge prestige once a car is 20 years old. Fuel economy also plays a major role in why these models survive while others disappear. Rising gas prices have quietly killed off many old V6 and V8 sedans that were otherwise reliable, but compact cars like the Civic, Corolla, Sentra, and Elantra remain relevant because they're still cheap to drive. Even the Camry manages to balance size and efficiency well enough to justify keeping it on the road. When owners can fill up for less and go farther, they're more likely to fix the car instead of replacing it, extending its lifespan year after year. There's also a psychological factor that Consumer Reports data hints at but doesn't directly state. These cars don't scare owners. Simple dashboards, predictable handling, and familiar driving dynamics make people comfortable keeping them longer. When something goes wrong, it feels manageable instead of overwhelming. That confidence leads to continued investment, and continued investment is what keeps old cars alive. Contrast that with more complex European models from the same era, which often end up scrapped not because they're beyond repair, but because owners fear the cost and complexity of fixing them. And then there's the used car ecosystem itself, which has shifted dramatically in recent years. With new car prices soaring and financing becoming tougher, demand for sub-$4,000 cars has exploded. That demand has effectively rescued many of these older vehicles from the junkyard. Cars that once would have been written off at 180,000 miles are now being repaired, cleaned up, and resold because buyers need affordable transportation. Consumer Reports' list reflects that reality. These cars didn't just survive because they were reliable, they survived because they fit a market that desperately needs them. What makes this list especially powerful is that none of these cars were designed to be legendary. They weren't halo models, they weren't technological showcases, and they weren't expensive when new. They were built for normal people, normal commutes, and normal lives, and that's exactly why they lasted. Over-engineering wasn't flashy, but it paid off decades later when these cars became lifelines for students, families, and workers who just need something that starts every morning. As buyers scroll through Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, and local classifieds, they're unknowingly chasing this same formula: simplicity, proven engines, and boring reliability. That's why listings for these models disappear faster than most others, even when the mileage looks scary on paper. A 20,000-mile Corolla scares people who don't know cars, but experienced buyers see potential because mileage means less when the platform has already proven it can go much farther. And that brings us deeper into the reality of buying under $4,000 today, where negotiation tactics, inspection priorities, and knowing when to walk away become just as important as knowing which badge to trust, because the difference between a car that refuses to die and one that drains your wallet often comes down to a few warning signs that most buyers overlook when they rush into a deal, especially when the price feels too good to be true. And understanding those warning signs is what separates smart budget buyers from the ones who end up back on the classifieds 2 weeks later looking for another car. And those warning signs usually appear long before the engine actually fails, but only if you know how to read them. Consumer Reports has long emphasized that reliability isn't just about whether a car can last, but whether it was cared for well enough to reach that potential. Uneven tire wear, mismatched panels, warning lights taped over, or a seller who can't clearly explain recent repairs are often louder red flags than high mileage itself. These cars are durable, but they still leave clues when something isn't right, and the smartest buyers slow down enough to notice them. One of the biggest mistakes people make at this price point is assuming that all examples of a reliable model are safe bets. Even a legendary Corolla or Civic can become a money pit if oil changes were skipped or cooling systems were neglected. That's why pre-purchase inspections matter so much more here than with newer vehicles. Spending a small amount up front to have a mechanic look at suspension components, engine compression, and transmission behavior can instantly reveal whether the car is a survivor or a ticking time bomb. Consumer Reports consistently reinforces this advice because data shows that maintenance history often matters more than brand reputation once a car crosses the 150,000-mile mark. Another overlooked factor is ownership profile. Cars that spent most of their lives with 1 or 2 long-term owners tend to last significantly longer than vehicles that bounced between multiple short-term owners. This is especially true for models like the Camry and Elantra, which are often owned by commuters or older drivers who followed service schedules religiously. On the flip side, Civics and Sentras sometimes attract younger owners, which doesn't automatically mean trouble, but it does mean buyers need to look more closely for signs of hard driving or skipped maintenance. Understanding who likely owned the car can tell you more than the odometer ever will. Insurance and registration costs also play a subtle role in why these cars refuse to die. Lower insurance premiums and simpler emissions, compliance, make it easier for owners to keep them legally on the road. When a car becomes expensive to insure or register, owners are more likely to give up on it even if it still runs well. These models avoided that fate by staying affordable in every category, which allowed them to remain useful long after their original warranties expired. Then there's the emotional attachment factor, something Consumer Reports data can't quantify, but real-world experience confirms. Many owners keep these cars because they trust them. A 20-year-old Camry that has never stranded its owner builds loyalty that no marketing campaign can replicate. That trust leads people to fix problems instead of replacing the car, and over time, that decision adds years, sometimes decades, to the vehicle's life. It's not uncommon to find owners who've spent more on maintenance than the car is worth on paper, simply because the car has never let them down. As the used market tightens, these vehicles are also becoming informal currency in the automotive world. A clean Corolla or Civic under $4,000 often sells within days, sometimes hours, because buyers recognize the value instantly. Sellers know this too, which is why patience becomes a weapon for smart shoppers. Rushing into the first available listing often leads to regret, while waiting for the right example can mean securing a car that will last several more years with minimal investment. And while newer cars promise advanced safety tech and digital dashboards, these older models offer something just as valuable: predictability. No complex driver assistance systems to fail, no massive touchscreens to replace, and no software updates to worry about. When something breaks, it's mechanical, tangible, and fixable. That simplicity is increasingly rare, and it's a major reason Consumer Reports continues to highlight older, proven models as smart buys for budget-conscious drivers. All of this leads to a bigger realization about the modern car market, one that becomes impossible to ignore once you've driven or owned one of these survivors, because the idea that cars are disposable hasn't always been true. And these machines are living proof that with the right design philosophy, a vehicle can outlast trends, outlast owners, and even outlast the market cycles that were supposed to replace it. And as we look closer at why some cars fade away while others keep coming back, listing after listing, year after year, it becomes clear that durability isn't an accident, it's a pattern. And that pattern becomes even more obvious when you start comparing these survivors to the cars that didn't make the cut. And when you start comparing these survivors to the cars that didn't make the cut, the contrast becomes almost brutal. Entire brands and model lines from the same era have virtually disappeared from the sub-$4,000 market, not because they were rare, but because they simply couldn't survive long-term ownership. Transmission failures, fragile electronics, and expensive proprietary parts quietly wiped them out. Consumer Reports data over the years shows this attrition clearly. Reliability gaps don't just affect first owners, they decide which cars are still alive 20 years later and which ones are already scrap. This is why the engines in these surviving cars matter so much. Naturally aspirated 4 cylinders, conservative tuning, and low-stress designs allowed these powertrains to age gracefully. Toyota's 1ZZ and 5S engines, Honda's D-Series motors, and Hyundai's improving early 2000s designs weren't chasing maximum horsepower. They were built to tolerate missed oil changes, cheap fuel, and long commutes. That tolerance is what allowed these cars to absorb years of imperfect ownership and still function. It's not that they never break, it's that when they do, the damage is rarely catastrophic. Transmissions tell a similar story. Manual gearboxes from this era are especially resilient, and even the automatics in these specific models avoided many of the failure-prone designs that plagued competitors. Consumer Reports reliability surveys consistently flagged problematic transmissions in other brands, and over time, those cars simply vanished from the used market. The ones still here are the ones that avoided those fatal flaws, even if they weren't perfect in every category. Chassis design also plays a role in survival. Cars like the Corolla, Civic, and Camry used simple suspension setups that are cheap to rebuild and forgiving of wear. Worn bushings, tired shocks, and aging ball joints don't total the car. They're maintenance items. Compare that to more complex multi-link systems from the same era that require specialized parts and labor, and it becomes clear why some cars get fixed while others get scrapped. Survivors are fixable, and fixable cars survive. Another reason these cars refuse to die is the invisible support network surrounding them. Independent shops love these models because they're predictable. DIY owners love them because tutorials, forums, and videos exist for nearly every repair imaginable. A broken window regulator or failing alternator isn't a mystery. It's a Saturday afternoon project. That ecosystem reduces fear, lowers cost, and extends life, all of which feed into the longevity Consumer Reports highlights year after year. The economic reality also can't be ignored. When a $3,500 car only needs a $400 repair to stay on the road, the math makes sense. When that same repair costs $1,800 due to rare parts or complex labor, the car is done. These models consistently fall on the right side of that equation, which is why they keep getting rescued instead of abandoned. They fit the logic of ownership, not just the emotion, and as inflation reshapes buying habits, these survivors are quietly becoming more valuable, not less. A decade ago, a 200,000-mile compact was seen as disposable. Today, it's seen as transportation security. Consumer Reports' list doesn't just reflect reliability. It reflects shifting priorities in the market. People are choosing proven endurance over novelty. And that choice is breathing new life into cars that were never meant to be exciting, only dependable. What's fascinating is how these vehicles bridge generations. A late 90s Corolla might be driven today by someone who wasn't even born when it was built, yet the car still fulfills the same role it always did. That continuity is rare in modern products, and it explains why these cars inspire such loyalty. They don't try to reinvent transportation. They just deliver it, consistently. And once you recognize that pattern, it changes how you view every used car listing, every high-mileage odometer reading, and every "still runs great" description, because suddenly you realize that survival in the automotive world isn't random. It's earned over years of design decisions and real-world abuse, and the cars that remain under $4,000 today are the ones that passed every test the market threw at them, which raises an even more important question about what happens next as these survivors become harder to find and demand keeps rising.